Okay, if you're here, say something, but I didn't see you when you came in. Abby? Abby here? Nancy? Sylvia? Jesus? Gerard? Okay, well, if they come, we'll get them caught up. If they don't come, they missed. Happy Tuesday to you. We will go over Module 13 today. So a couple of things to go over with you. You will want to, from your Canvas page, go to this class and Module 13. All right, so from the World History class, go ahead and click there and then move down to Module 13. So Module 13 is what we'll go over. So go ahead and scroll down until you get to Module 13, which is right there. So here we roll. All right, so in module 13, we're going to take a look at China and the effects of imperialism on China. We'll also look at what the United States does during this time of imperialism. Remember, last week we went over the end of the Industrial Revolution as it spreads throughout the continent of Europe and sort of the effects that it has on Africa, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia in terms of imperialism. That's what we looked at in Module 12. Remember that all the things for Module 11 were due Monday. They're still available until Friday. So if you haven't finished them, you can. Module 12 is due next Monday. There's only one assignment. That is the 21-question quiz. The review game has all of those questions, I believe, on there. And then this week, as I said, what we'll take a look at is China and the United States as it relates to imperialism before we sort of get to nationalism and the causes of World War I. So that's what we're looking at there. Let me reset and make sure this works for you. Sometimes my screen doesn't keep up. Okay, so a couple of things here. Let me go ahead and expand this out. So last week we talked about, at the very beginning of class, we talked about the British expansion of Industrial Revolution ideas to Belgium, to Germany third, where they brought people in from Britain. They even paid people from Britain to come over. The Germans sent their children to Great Britain to learn English and learn these industrial revolutionary skills. And that spread throughout the continent. France is one of the last ones because of the issue with the French Revolution and what they had going on. But basically, what it does is create a need for more what we call in economics factors of production, right? What in history refers to as raw materials. So the Europeans look to the continent of Africa for those raw materials. They make deeper and deeper incursions into Africa and start claiming up and dividing up Africa for these raw materials. Once they have the raw materials to produce the goods and services they want, then they start looking to Southeast Asia. Eventually they'll look to China for markets for these. So one of the first countries to establish regular trade routes are the Spanish and the Portuguese, right? During the 1600s and 1700s, they were probably the most active in explorers in terms of the oceans getting to different parts of the world from Europe. And so these Spanish and Portuguese traders in the 1600s and the 1700s established trade routes via the sea, via the oceans, to China. Now, British, obviously, the leader in the Industrial Revolution, wanted a product they could sell to the Chinese and move their way into that trade sort of deal, and they've come up with opium. And they basically import opium and get the Chinese hooked on the drug so that they can keep importing that drug. It actually causes what's called the Opium War in 1839 through 1842 because of the issues that it causes. So once the British introduced the drug, once the Spanish and Portuguese, the Germans are going to make a play. There are going to be a number of countries that go into China trying to exert their influence. Now, the United States had not been involved in a lot of imperialistic efforts outside of the Western Hemisphere, but they asked that China stay open and free to all. And so as the Chinese stayed open and free to all, one of the things that they looked at was a way to accomplish that, So they wanted to be able to do that in a way that made themselves available to any possible expansion. And so this obviously leads to internal problems in China. China in 1850 has probably the world's largest population of a country at 450 million people. That's a 30% increase over the previous century. There was a food shortage problem. That food shortage problem causes chaos and internal strife in China, similar to what it did in France. And we have what's called the Taiping Rebellion. And it's basically a peasant rebellion against the wealthy because there's not enough food to eat. This weakens the dynasty of China and makes it susceptible to the Spanish, to the Portuguese, to the British, to the Germans, to the French, to any outside influence, because they are fighting a war within their own country. They don't have time to fend off these imperial, basically explorers, right? Imperial people that are using this as an excuse to get in. So this outside influence is called spheres of influence in China. And Japan is probably the, well, it is the most Asian country, and also takes advantage of it the most. They, in the northern part, up around Nanking, they take advantage of taking over that area of China and using it. Remember, Japan is a set of islands, and so any sort of raw materials, they're gonna have a hard time getting onto. That's why they want part of China for themselves. European nations, along with Japan, start sending products to China, expect the Chinese to buy that. They'll take the raw materials just like they did to the raw materials in Africa and send those out. As I said, the US wanted an open door policy for that. This interference from foreign countries and foreign interference starts what's called the Boxer Rebellion. And so we'll show you a little short clip on that.
The beginning of the 20th century found the 2,000-year-old Chinese empire in decline. Foreign powers descended like vultures on what was left of the dying Manchu dynasty. The once powerful Chinese people fumed as they saw their land and protectorates taken over by foreigners. Burma were lost to England.
Now, Peking up there is the old name for Beijing before the communists take over in 1949.
Korea to Japan, and Vietnam to France. As the power structure within the Manchu court struggled to maintain its tenuous control within China, foreign encroachment intensified internal political conflicts. What had been an ancient closed society was threatened by the corruption of progress and foreign influence.
When the United States gained control of the Philippines, as a result of the Spanish-American War, many saw the possession of the islands as a gateway to large markets in mainland Asia. American products could be sold there, and many capitalists envisioned a new and untapped market for investors in large-scale railroad construction. At the dawn of the 20th century, American factories were producing more goods than the country could consume, and the continued growth of the American economy depended on exports to foreign markets. China had been weakened by war and enormous amounts of foreign intervention. Britain, France, Germany, Russia, and Japan all had established settlements along China's coast. These nations also managed sizable spheres of influence where each country maintained strict economic control. The U.S. government and American investors began to fear a future in which China would be carved into European colonies that were closed to American products and companies. With American interest in mind, the U.S. Secretary of State, John Hay, issued a series of policy statements that became known as the Open Door Notes. These were letters addressed to the leaders of European powers suggesting that nations share trading rights in China. This would create what Hay referred to as an open door. It would be in the best interest of all, he argued, if no one country held a monopoly on trade in any part of China.
In China's capital, Peking, where from these ancient altars countless emperors had sought the mandate of heaven, the myth of heavenly rule persisted still. But deep within the palaces where China's Manchu emperors reigned, by 1900, that myth too was dead. For here ruled China's evil spirit, the Empress Dowager Cixi, a Manchu concubine, bedmate to an emperor for whom she had produced an heir. A woman with a gift of malice, said to have poisoned her own son upon his throne, installed her infant nephew as emperor, killed his mother, and then imprisoned him in 1898. An ignorant woman, but unchallenged ruler of the empire. Her court, a whispering of ladies-in-waiting and eunuch favorites. Chief among them, eunuch Li Yan-ying, as depraved as she. When told China needed ships to fight the foreigners, they used naval appropriations to build a marble pleasure boat in a nearby lake.
Hostilities that had been simmering for decades exploded when China declared war against the foreign powers of France, Russia, England, Japan, Austria, Italy, Germany, and the United States. The Chinese became distrustful of foreigners and were greatly concerned by the influx of Christian missionaries who converted an increasing number of Chinese to an alien religion. A campaign of terror had begun the previous year when a secret organization called the Boxers began killing Christian missionaries and their converts in the northern provinces of China. The Boxers were a clandestine social society that had been in existence since the early 1700s. The group preached a mixture of Buddhist, Confucian, and Taoist ideas and was rabidly opposed to any change in ancient culture. Members practiced a form of shadow boxing and believed that followers of the cult were invulnerable.
1,000 villages deep in China mirrored her primitive hatred.
So basically, right, they did not want foreigners anywhere in their country, and they basically form and start a rebellion in the northern part of China against the foreigners, whether it be British, whether it be German, whether it be Austrian, whether it be France, it didn't matter to them. Next, we'll take a look at United States' role of imperialism during this time period. And so the United States, outside of Secretary of State Hay asking for an open door policy, the United States comes up with two policies of their own. One is the Monroe Doctrine, and then there's the Roosevelt Corollary to that. And basically the United States focuses their imperial desires on Latin America. The former Spanish colonies in North America and South America, really Central America and South America, the United States helped them gain independence. What comes out of that is definitely the revolutionary leaders who fought against the Spanish eventually become dictators, which isn't going to be good for the United States' interest. It's going to create a big disparity between the normal working class and the wealthy landowners in these former Spanish colonies. And you're going to see exports become a bigger and bigger deal out of Latin America. During President Monroe's terms in office as president, he basically makes an announcement during a speech and says the American continents, both North America and South America, are not to be considered as subjects for future colonization. He does not want the British, the Germans, the Spanish, the Portuguese, anybody outside of the Western Hemisphere, which is the North American and South American continents, coming and dividing places up. It's too close to the United States. Cuba and Philippines were the best test for this doctrine, as the war against the Spanish basically forces the Spanish out of this hemisphere in terms of Cuba, and that's how we take control of the Philippines. You also have Panama as an example of a colony in which the United States helps fight a revolution, gain its freedom, and in return, Panama gives the United States a 50-mile 51-mile long by 10-mile wide stretch of the isthmus between North America and South America to build the Panama Canal. The French had tried to build the canal and had suffered great losses in terms of the number of people killed from malaria. And the United States, obviously, for all of the industrial revolution that's taking place and the shipment of goods, wants a shorter route from things on the West Coast to the East Coast. Because, you know, during the late 1800s, early 1900s, you still have the development of the railroad system here. Once that canal is built, it shuts down and makes easier, right, by about a month, having to go all the way around the tip of South America. Now, when Teddy Roosevelt, after McKinley's assassination, comes to be president of the United States and then wins his own term, he declares that the U.S. has the right to be the international police power in all of the Western Hemisphere, and this is the corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. All right, so we'll take a little look at this. Let me reset this so you can see it.
I got you, don't worry.
Next order guidance.
Oh, we are now. I'm gonna make this place your
Looks like you're home.
This holiday season, hurry in to the BMW Road Home sales event and find your way home in the ultimate driving machine. Get a $1,000 BMW credit plus an additional credit of up to $3,500 on select models.
In person, James Monroe cut the figure of the quintessential hero of the Revolution, from his boots, breeches, and ceremonial sword, right up to his cockade hat.
The funny thing about James Monroe is that no one ever seems to have thought terribly well of him, except his character. Everybody said he was honest, and everybody said he was trustworthy. But no one ever said he was extremely intelligent. Yet this man must have been doing something right, because he gets elected twice to the presidency by crushing margins.
Monroe's presidency was so seemingly amicable that he was unopposed when he ran for his second term.
He had, in many ways, a falsely easy presidency. This is supposed to be the era of good feelings. He seems to reign over a period of peace and happiness in America.
But not really. At the beginning of Monroe's first term, the territory of Missouri petitioned for statehood. In theory, adding a star to the flag should have been cause for national celebration. Instead, it ignited a great political debate over slavery. Would Missouri be a free or slave state? As Congress debated the explosive issue, Monroe, a slave owner himself, made it clear that he would veto any legislation that restricted self-determination for any state. Eventually, Congress passed the Missouri Compromise of 1820.
Enters the Union as a slave state. Maine enters the Union as a free state. And prohibitions are put upon the expansion of slavery.
The slavery question simmered. Monroe faced a border crisis in Florida. The territory was still owned by Spain, but the Spanish did little to govern it. By 1818, border incursions were common. Seminole Indians, in particular, were raiding white settlements in Georgia. These raids were often encouraged by British privateers who operated on the Florida coast. In response, Monroe sent troops to the region, led by the hero of New Orleans, General Andrew Jackson. In 1819, the Spanish ceded Florida to the United States without a fight. Border disputes were constant during Monroe's tenure. Significantly, it was a border issue that led to Monroe's defining moment in office. In December 1823,
the president delivered a message to Congress and to the world. Ostensibly, he addressed a minor dispute between Russia and the United States over Alaska. But the speech contained a short paragraph that became his legacy. It stated, "The American continents are henceforth not to be considered as subjects for future colonization by any European powers."
The Monroe Doctrine is our statement that we reject European countries coming in and trying to acquire further territorial gains in this hemisphere. You stay in your hemisphere, we'll stay in ours.
It wasn't until 1852 that people began calling it the Monroe Doctrine. The end of James Monroe's presidency was a turning point in American political history. He was the last of the revolutionary generation, the last of the architects of the American.
So he is going to set that forth, right, and basically set that up. And then what you have later, right, in the decades coming after that, is this idea about the Roosevelt Corollary. This is about just over 2 minutes here. And this explains that, which takes it a step further and basically says, hey, if anything goes on in this Western Hemisphere, North America, South America, it's going to be the United States that determines that. Should I share that?
Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to some Hip Hughes history. We're going to hit you up on the Roosevelt Corollary. How's that for some giddy-up vocabulary? So sit back, relax. Let's see if we can't grow your brain 5 times its size with a little bit of history. So, Teddy Roosevelt. The Roosevelt Corollary is framed out when Roosevelt wins his term in 1904. He was already president from assassination of William McKinley. But in his inauguration address, he frames out the Roosevelt Corollary, even though I would argue the implementation occurred even before 1904. And basically what we're doing, guys, is we're kind of taking the Monroe Doctrine and we're handing a gun to that concept. Remember, the Monroe Doctrine, in class I explained it as dog piss in the hood, because in a sense we're marking our territory in Latin America, expanding upon Washington's isolationism. In a sense, we're creating a sphere of influence. We're expanding the hood. And what Roosevelt is basically doing, now that we're in the age of imperialism, and I don't have an upset stomach, I'm just getting a little bit hungry, because the concept is that imperialism for the United States is, in a sense, a hunger for raw materials and new markets, and Latin America offers that to us. So we might justify it in the textbook by saying that we're trying to keep Europe out of meddling in the Western Hemisphere, but I think more realistically the answer is that the United States is going to get ready to meddle in the hemisphere to protect business interests, whether it's sugar interest in Cuba, or it's oil interest in Nicaragua, or it is transportation interest in Colombia, Panama, whatever it is. The idea of the Roosevelt Corollary is intervention. And 12 or 13 times the United States is going to intervene in our hood. I say our hood like it's our hood. In Latin America, from the period of 1900 to say 1915, 1916 until World War I. So Roosevelt Corollary, Monroe with a gun, right? Once the dog marks its territory, now the dog is big enough to carry with it a big stick. It might speak softly, but bam, bam, bam.
All right. So bananas, sugar cane are generally what raw materials the United States is looking for during this time. When we take a look at the Panama Canal, this will show you here how much time it saves by going through the isthmus instead of all the way around the continent.
This season, let the ultimate driving machine light your way home. Exceptional offers won't last. The BMW Road Home Sales Event is going on now. Get a $1,000 BMW credit plus an additional credit of up to $3,500 on select models.
Right, so this is an extension of what we had in terms of the Monroe Doctrine and the Roosevelt Corollary. The fact that we are going to be the ones who determine and help build the canal after it is shown no longer to be possible by the French. The French just had a number of issues in terms of people, plus it's a long way from France to get all of that machinery over there. There is no canal, so you have to basically, right, ship everything directly, and it is quite the mess, so to speak. And then when you throw in the malaria is deadly at this time, and they just lost thousands of people through that. So go ahead and shift to, I'll show you this. Go ahead and shift to your next page in your Canvas module. So just to double check and make sure I didn't miss, Sylvia still didn't come. All right. Still no Jesus. Okay. Last thing I want to show you is how the lock system works, because it's based on gravity. It's pretty crazy. So let me show you this part here before we talk about what you need to do before we get out of here.
Right now I'm floating on the eighth wonder of the world, the Panama Canal. Almost 100 years after it's opened, it still impresses. Before there was a Panama Canal, ships had to sail 13,000 miles around the tip of South America to get from one ocean to another. The dream to build a shortcut dates back to the 16th century. The French were the first to try to capture that dream. They chose Panama, the narrow strip of land separating the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. In 1880, they grabbed their shovels and started digging what they wanted to become a 50-mile-long sea-level canal. 9 years, 22,000 deaths, and $250 million later, the French gave up. On May 4th, 1904, the Americans took over, but with a very different approach. They dammed existing rivers and flooded a 123 square mile area, creating the world's largest man-made lake, smack through the middle of Panama. The only problem, it was 85 feet above sea level. They needed a way to lift the ships up that high. The solution? Locks. Massive concrete ship elevators, which they built on each end of the canal. When the Panama Canal was built, locks were not a new concept. Far from it. They were invented by the Chinese in the 10th century, but no locks had ever been built at this scale. Here's how they work. When a ship enters the first lock, watertight gates close behind it, sealing the lock chamber. Next, water is emitted into the chamber from the lock above the ship. All this water is gravity-fed through giant valves and culverts, 18-foot diameter water tunnels, hidden inside the lock walls. The floating ship is then raised one step to the level of the next lock chamber. The gates upstream open to allow the ship to move forward. Once the ship has entered the next lock, the process repeats. The ship rises through 3 locks until it has reached the inland lake. The same thing happens at the other end of the canal, but this time, each lock is drained instead of filled. Once the ship is lowered 85 feet through 3 locks, it is back at sea level. Now, judging by the shape of this control panel, I'm guessing that this is in direct correlation with the locks.
Exactly. They actually represent the locks.
And how much water does it take to move a ship from chamber to chamber?
Okay, the chambers are 1,000 feet long by 110 feet wide by about 81 feet tall. So we use a total of about 26 million gallons to raise a ship or to lower a ship every time. Wow.
Right? So 26 million gallons every lock, and there's 3 locks going basically, and it's really south to north, north to south. We think of it as west to east, east to west, but if you look at the isthmus, it is that way. And so gravity basically does that. So gravity will pull the water down from the lock that's higher to fill up the lock as you move from one way to the other. So let's say that you're going this way, right? And you're coming, say, from the Pacific Ocean over here to the Atlantic Ocean, right? You're basically, this lake, this man-made lake that they created is 86 feet above sea level. And so what you do is you let water in here to the first set of locks, right? And then gravity takes over. The second set of locks is obviously lower, but as you open these doors, it goes down and it fills in this, right? Raises the boat up here. And then you can do the same thing in the third lock. Open this up, raise it up, and you can level out each level. So it just works based off of gravity. And then it works coming up, right? Because all you have to do is let the water in from this direction to raise that up. So if you're coming from this direction here, right, you just take water that's way up above you, fill in each of these locks, and it brings up this level. So to go from level 1 to level 2, all you do is take water that had gone into 3, put it into 2, from 2 into 1, and it raises up. So that's how they raise and lower via that. So still more than 100 years later, it's crazy to think what they had. But that's how that works. So all you need to do between now and the next time that we meet next week is to look at China. There are 3 questions about imperialism as it affects China. So Unit 4, Lesson 19, Section 2, both columns, sort of pre-imperialism, post-imperialism, or sphere of influence is what they would talk about. As I said, these won't be due until a week from next Monday because modules 11 and 12 being pushed back a week. There is a map of China that talks about the spheres of influence of the French, the Germans, the Russians, the Japanese. So basically, you're just going to take these areas here of the British, the French, the Germans, the Japanese, and the Russians, and identify those there. And so basically, you're just going to fill that in terms of a multiple choice. And then there is a short quiz on that. These are the review questions here that you can practice as many times as you want. And then the seventh assessment is all online basically. So it'll be one question at a time. You'll hit next and it'll take you to the next question. And I said there's only 21. So I think there's 30 on the review game, 21 questions. And it is pretty simple in terms of what have you. So what did colonial rule in Latin American countries result in, right? We talked about that, wealthy landowners in control of power in those Latin American countries. So that's what you need to focus on between now and the next time we meet next week. So when we look at module 11, again, as I said, that was due Monday. It's still open until Friday. Next Monday is just the imperialism quiz that you need to take. That's the only thing for that module. And then